Alright, I haven't brought you guys a documentary in a little while. I've had a long list of things going on. Um, while I basically was putting together things for a very good documentary, um, and that took about 3 weeks. Unfortunately, with that, the basement was flooded. My laptop got destroyed. Everything was pretty much gone. And somebody asked me when I was going to put out a new one. I said I was working on it, but somebody said, well, you know what? You're almost up to 1,000 subs organically. Why don't you go ahead and put something out? I said, all right, fine, I will. So I'm going to put out the Shape of the Universe documentary. As you know, there's a lot of constants to the way that everything actually exists in our physical reality, and that everything almost appears cyclical or in a series of motions which kind of come back onto itself. And whether or not you have the physics background to understand any of the magnetics or the physics that describe the reasoning for the universe and any complementary chaos or other theories out there that complement this, you know that it basically comes back to Orange Theory, toroids, toruses, and various complementary ideas. Now, when I first looked into the toroid theory, or Orange Theory among others, I didn't really believe that it had all the parts that I thought the universe would actually have. When I first learned about it in school, in a general physics class, it was taught to us basically that, you take a ball, you put it through a funnel, and then it rotates through and through and through and horizontal and the other way around. Longitudinal, I apologize. And everything basically either happens at once or happens nearly at once, and that it happens in a giant spiral effect. And this is basically the idea of the universe, that it recycles itself and puts itself back out there. It may or may not clear up any of the universal constants, and from what we understand, this happens all at once across all dimensions and all hierarchies of the universe itself. And basically, this has been happening since the beginning of time. And depending on your understanding of the toroid theory, torus theory, orange theory, or how it even relates to the shape of the universe, you come to one conclusion in general, that there's a lot of chaos and entropy involved in this, in that a lot of information actually gets lost in translation. And one of my next videos I'm going to put out, and I had a really good paper I wrote on this once, and that the data management system of the universe, or everything that controls the universe, doesn't actually have a storage facility where it stores everything. And I want to get into this just for a second because I want to explain why the toroid theory is absolutely correct, and that it doesn't need a storage facility for the data. It can just run the data and move it through, expand the data, multiply the data by all different outputs, and then basically, make that data available in every form it can possibly be made. And that's why the universe is in constant form. It changes every once in a while. We don't notice it for any number of reasons. I was going to tell you a nice little story involving this, but what I am going to say is that the reason the toroid theory actually works is because it pretty much goes back to anything we can think of. If a car goes by and goes by really fast, let's say between three friends. Hour later, somebody comes by and says, "Hey, you guys know what that car that went by?" And they go, "Yeah." They go, "What color was it?" One says it was a navy blue. One says it was more of a sea green. And oddly enough, one guy or gal says, "You know what? I think it was kind of reddish in color." Well, how can three people see one object three different ways when the object in question didn't have multiple colors? Well, yes, they perceive things differently. One might have a color deficiency. One might have seen it in the sun, while the other had seen it in a shadowy area where they were standing. And this basically says that even as events happen, the universe does not save the data universally. So when you have three different people witness the same event, you have three different stories. Guy goes back and says, "All right, well, how fast was it going?" And one person says, "Well, the speed limit around here is 25 miles per hour. I gotta be honest, I think it was going about better part of 40. One guy said, "Well, I don't know. I'm gonna say better part of 30 miles an hour. The last guy goes, I'm kind of a lead foot myself. If I'm cruising through here and this and that, 35-ish. The guy was going about 35-ish, or the gal. And that's that. And so you get three different stories again. Well, how is that possible? Well, again, the data management center in the universe doesn't save data universally, and thusly three different people witnessed the same event in question three different ways. And the toroidal universe allows for that influx because in this design here, the information is just passed around, scattered, and reabsorbed. It is not saved universally. And that is why I believe the toroidal theory, at least in part, is a pretty good way of representing how a functional universe, especially ours, actually manifests itself. Because it doesn't have to have a data save point for every event. I mean, that's why, we have things that decay. That is why we have things that fall apart on us and everything else, because the data points for them to save that data doesn't exist over time. That's another reason why the toroidal universe exists. I'll go into what it is and what it isn't in a minute. But I just want to make one more point on this, because this is why I think the electrons can move through this force, move across all time and space, all dimensions at once, and it's literally the same fabric vibrating in different ways, and it doesn't have to save anything. You ever notice that an old person, for the most part, can remember what happened 40 years ago but not happened today. But a young person can remember what happened today and doesn't care about history. It's because their time differential is different. The older person kind of remembers more when they were younger because their body isn't set, to remember that sort of thing when they're older because they just don't have the data anymore to save that information. Just like when someone dies. You ever notice how many people, when they die, most people can't remember much about them? Where if they were in your life, you had like 20, 30 memories, and once they die, you have like 5 memories? Whether it be a pet, whether it be a grandparent, a parent, any number of things. This is actually true. It goes back to the data save point issue. And I want to get into the toroidal universe idea in a second. And this is very important, folks. And what a toroidal universe is the idea that pretty much everything, no matter what it is, gets reused, goes back into the same information and everything else. And you can kind of look into this any way you want, but the representation is almost like an unlimited black hole of the universe, in that the information gets pulled in and then scattered and then reabsorbed into the same form called a toroid, torus, or any of these. And depending on your interpretation of this, I mean, the idea on this has been as old as time. There's been lots of different groups. I guess there is a mentioning of this in Cheops Pyramid. Long list of others. And basically it comes down to neither beginning nor an end, locked in a perpetual cycle. A toroidal universe has both attributes. Our segmented universe is blasted out of a white hole, expands over the surface, crosses over an equator, contracts back into a black hole antipode, to be half spun through the center at light speed again. And basically, they try to account for the Big Bang being, 311.040 trillion years. If you really want some good information, look up B. Fueller's synergetics in vector equilibrium pump model. I guess he has some good stuff there. But basically, it's what I've been saying all along. It's a cyclical model of the universe, which offers an appealing alternative to prevailing theory, according to Paul J. Steinhardt, among others, in Princeton, and pretty much anything else you can think of. And whether it's any of the big colleges that you look at for this or anything else, it pretty much works. It doesn't give you the best representation, but it does kind of work. And the way I look at this, folks, is a lot different. Basically, the idea here is that not only is the electrons and all of the reality fabric being, expanded, brought together in every form, dimension, time, everything else, pulled through and expanded again, pulled through, expanded again, in all senses of direction, all senses of everything. But it's going left, it's going right, it's going up, it's going down. At the same time, at every influx, every dimension, every magnetic pole, every antipode, every diode, every type of anything in any structure you can name is happening all at once. And I believe there are these quote-unquote universes that are basically up against each other, or nearly up against each other, and they're complementing each other, and this just goes into a giant cycle which basically collapses on itself and keeps feeding everything. Where it stops, nobody knows. So this will definitely be an interesting thing to see. Since I always seem to be bringing you guys things on magnetics, I wanted to bring the magnetic field created by a toroid or a tokamak. You guys might have been more familiar with that. I am. I'm not going to go into the major details here because I'll be honest, it's probably been a long time since I've actually looked into this. But what I will say is that if you look at this diagram over here, near it says Amperian loop, you'll notice that there's one direction going ds toward direction B, and in the center it's going BCR in a loop, and in the actual loop itself it's actually going counterclockwise. And you have the forward and the backward I energies moving, and according to this, I'm looking at it, the Amperian loop has energy that's actually flowing in and out depending on the situation, and it has loops of the magnetics. So there's pretty much every type of directional path and directional magnetism you can think of happens within this. Now I know this is just basically a magnetic coil that we know of, and that this is not a true toroid as we would understand in the universal sense, and that this is only part of the actual equation. B is constant, and to the tangent ds, we can pull B outside of the integral. The wire passes through the loop n times. We see that. The magnetic field seems to be confined to the inside of the toroid. We see that. And the inside of the toroid is where all the magic happens. B is perpendicular to ds. B is not equal to any 0 because it can't be 0 in the known universe, at least in this function, unless you turn it off. The B field is the same as that around the straight wire, except that each turn of the wire produces a B field. Like I said, this is not the exact mathematics of the universal model, but you do kind of see how some of the constants and some of the vocabulary among other figures seem to complement each other. Now I'm going to warn you about something. This laptop I'm working off of, along with some of the changes they made to the internet videos, this is going to be a little bit choppy. I apologize. This is the shape of the universe in Orange Theory, and this is working off a toroid shape. If you notice the intersecting lines, the energy is moving in all possible directions at once, coming and going. So this looks like it should be the way it is. This guy is called Christian Vlady. The universe is expanding and contracting simultaneously. in continuous flow, like I said, in all possible directions. That's actually a good one there. The energy burst from the center of the toroid basically builds space between, flows over and inward, and back into cycle. Energy speed constant. Hang on 1 second. There we go. Okay, so one more second here. Gotta back it up a little bit. I messed up. Alright, so the speed is constant, but the space between grows exponentially on the outside, allowing everything to process into the deeper dimensions, higher frequencies, higher resolutions, and everything before being sucked into the black hole and out the white hole. And basically, speed is constant, but space distance grows exponentially on the outside. This model here, you can see everything as it is, and you can see that everything looks good. There we go. And now you see how everything is in motion. It says this can be understood as relative space this can be understood as relative space acceleration, or as general space meets relative acceleration. That's kind of the way I would put it. So they're going to go into a bunch of things. They're going to show you basically the energy has a spiral trajectory, which we already know. They're going to go into a bunch of things here. Multiple trajectories according to the degree of inclination, and then they're going to show you that the energies do disperse in all possible fields, in all possible directions, all possible things of that nature. And that is kind of the way I look at this. So the shape of the universe basically is a toroid in theory. I look at this every day and I kind of go, that still works. Because there doesn't seem to be a data matrix that everything's saved in. Because when we view things, we view them differently than anyone else. Like I said, 3 people witness a car go by, 2 people say, you know, one says a dark blue, other one says a powder blue or a sea green, and one person just flat out says a different color will say red. Like I said before, how can 3 different people witness the same event and have 1 outlier and 2 similar? It's because the universe doesn't save its data as it happens. That's why, if you remember a movie called Langoliers, I think it was, a movie in the 80s or 90s where people go through some kind of a black hole where time stops for them and they see all these little weird monsters eating up the time. That's why, at least in theory, that sort of thing, even in the most ridiculous sense, isn't even necessary, because as time happens, it happens to everyone differently, and it isn't saved. That's why when a building is gone, that's why when a person dies, the memories of that building, the memories of that person disintegrate, because the fabric that kept those ideas around are gone. And that is how this toroidal shape is still able to exist in absolute form. Because it can take that fabric of electrons, move it in every possible direction, at every possible time, at every possible shape, expand it outward, pull it inward, and expand it by every multiple it can find and do that every single time across all dimensions, times, etc., across all universes and everything else that it can be implemented in. And this is basically the idea that the shape of the universe is, at least in some form or fashion, a toroid. So I can't wait for this to, be proven 100%. I think, if anything, if you want to know how time travel works, this is the idea. If you want to know what CERN is actually doing, this is the idea. It's making these, it's putting the keyholes together, and it's basically re-engineering the universe as it is, like this. Among other things, of course. But this seems to be the most appropriate shape for the universe, because the data isn't saved, at least not in theory, so it doesn't have to wait for things to happen every hour of every day. Things change. You can take 1,000,000 pictures of yourself an hour, and if you have the right cameras in infrared, in night vision, in thermal, and in everything else, your very shape, your very form changes, whether it be your hair follicles, the nutrition in your blood flow, the amount of urine in your bladder, the amount of air in your lungs. Everything can be calculated, and that the next second or two, nanoseconds even, everything about you is absolutely different. Yet, from one constant second to the next, for a little bit of time at a time, everything about you is quote-unquote the same. And yet, it is absolutely different. It's the same thing with the old person. When they die, you had all these memories when they were alive, and once they're gone, that's it. You have 5 memories, you have 10 memories. You might go through and go, oh my goodness, I remember this. But you're looking at an image, you're remembering 2 or 3 memories. When they're around, that fluid that keeps their data alive in everybody's head is there. When they're gone, that's no longer part of it, just like a building or anything else. It's because there's no save point in the universe. The data is expanded, it's multiplied by every constant and variable it can be, scattered across time and space, dimensions, etc. It's drawn back in, multiplied by every constant available, and reapplied. And this is why, at least in theory, the shape of the universe is a toroid. Thank you. I said I was working on it, but somebody said, well, you know what, you're almost up to 1,000 subs organically, why don't you go ahead and put something out? I said, alright, fine, I will. So, I'm going to put out the Shape of the Universe documentary. As you know, there's a lot of constants to the way that everything actually exists in our physical reality, and that everything almost appears cyclical, or in a series of motions, toruses, and various complementary ideas. Now, when I first looked into the toroid theory, or orange theory among others, I didn't really believe that it had all the parts that I thought the universe would actually have. When I first learned about it in school, in a general physics class, it was taught to us basically that, you take a ball, you put it. Alright, I haven't brought you guys a documentary in a little while. I've had a long list of things going on. While I basically was putting together things for a very good documentary, and that took about 3 weeks. Unfortunately, with that, the basement was flooded. My laptop got destroyed. Everything was pretty much gone. And somebody asked me when I was going to put out a new one through a funnel, and then it rotates through and through and through and horizontal and the other way around. Longitudinal, I apologize. And everything basically either happens at once or happens nearly at once, and that it happens in a giant spiral effect. And this is basically the idea of the universe, that it recycles itself and puts itself back out there. It may or may not clear up any of the universal constants, which kind of come back onto itself. And whether or not you have the physics background to understand any of the magnetics or the physics that describe the reasoning for the universe and any complementary chaos or other theories out there that complement this, you know that it basically comes back to Orange Theory toroids,